Sign here, you illiterate janitor, and don't you dare ask questions about what you're signing. Christina Blackwell shoved the legal papers into the trembling hands of the old man holding a mop bucket, her diamond rings catching the fluorescent lights of the executive boardroom. My husband might run this company, but I decide who gets fired around here, and you're about to lose your pathetic little job for existing in my presence. What this billionaire's trophy wife didn't know, what nobody in that Dallas skyscraper knew except me. Uncle Sam was that the illiterate janitor she was screaming at was actually Daniel Morrison, the reclusive founder and sole owner of Morrison Industries, worth $4.2 billion, who had been working undercover for 6 months to expose exactly this kind of executive corruption. You see, I'd been working night security at Morrison Industries headquarters for 3 years, watching the drama unfold between the company as CEO, Christina, Fess husband Thomas, Blackwell, and the mysterious cleaning crew that seemed to know way too much about corporate operations. And what I discovered about Daniel Morrison, S undercover mission was about to blow the lid off one of the biggest corporate frauds in Texas history. Before I tell you how this trophy wife S arrogance destroyed her luxurious life in the most spectacular way possible, let me ask you something that might hit close to home. Have you ever seen someone in power treat a worker so badly it made you want to step in and defend them? Drop your city in the comments and tell me about the worst case of workplace bullying you've ever witnessed. Because what happened next in that Dallas boardroom is gonna make every office drama you've heard look like a kindergarten disagreement. Now, if you'll excuse this old man for taking a moment to settle in properly here, these stories about rich people getting what's coming to them always give me this warm feeling inside. At my age, having cleaned floors in corporate America for 40 years, I've learned that karma is real and you don't play around when it comes to protecting good people from bad ones. Thank you for bearing with Uncle Sam as I tell you about the most satisfying takedown I ever witnessed. To understand how Daniel Morrison ended up mopping floors in his own billion-dollar company, we got to go back about 18 months, to when he first started suspecting that his hand-picked CEO, Thomas Blackwell, was systematically looting the company. Morrison had spent 30 years building from nothing. Daniel had founded Morrison Industries back in 1994 as a small construction supply business in Fort Worth, and through brilliant strategy and genuine care for his employees, he built it into one of the largest industrial equipment manufacturers in North America. The company was Daniel's baby, right? He'd started it with $50,000 in savings and a pickup truck, working 18-hour days, hauling equipment across Texas while his wife Karen kept the books at their kitchen table. They'd built something real together, a company that treated workers fairly, paid good wages, provided excellent benefits, and earned customer loyalty through honest dealing rather than corporate manipulation. By 2020, Morrison Industries was doing $3.7 billion in annual revenue with 12,000 employees across 6 states. Daniel and Karen owned 100% of the company privately, refusing to take it public because they wanted to maintain control over how employees were treated and how business was conducted. They were old-school entrepreneurs who believed that building something of lasting value mattered more than maximizing quarterly profits. But then Karen died suddenly from a heart attack in 2021, and Daniel's world collapsed. The woman who'd been his partner for 33 years, who'd believed in him when nobody else did, who'd helped build their empire from scratch, she was gone. Daniel fell into a depression so deep he couldn't function normally for months, barely leaving his ranch outside Austin, except for Karen's funeral. That's when the vultures started circling, sensing that the company's founder was vulnerable and distracted by grief. Thomas Blackwell had been Morrison Industries' CFO for 8 years, hired on the recommendation of consultants, who assured Daniel that the Harvard MBA graduate would bring sophisticated financial management to a company that had grown beyond its folksy origins. Thomas was everything Daniel wasn't: smooth, sophisticated, connected to Dallas society, married to a beautiful young woman from old Texas money. He spoke the language of modern corporate finance, talking about synergies and optimization and shareholder value in ways that made Daniel feel like a dinosaur who didn't understand his own business anymore. During Daniel's grief-fueled absence, Thomas convinced the board of directors, handpicked by Daniel himself, that the founder needed to step back and let professional management take over daily operations. The board, concerned about Daniel's mental state and the company's need for steady leadership, voted to promote Thomas to CEO while Daniel retained his ownership but withdrew from active management. It seemed like a reasonable arrangement at the time. Daniel was too depressed to fight it, and part of him genuinely believed that maybe he was too old-fashioned to run a modern corporation. Thomas assured him that the company would be in good hands, that Curran's legacy would be honored, that nothing fundamental would change about how Morrison Industries operated. But within 6 months, Thomas had begun systematically restructuring the company in ways that betrayed everything Daniel and Curran had built. Employee benefits were cut to remain competitive. Wages were frozen to improve margins. Long-time workers were fired and replaced with cheaper contractors. Safety standards were relaxed to reduce unnecessary costs. The changes were presented to the board as necessary modernization, but Daniel recognized them for what they really were: corporate looting disguised as efficiency improvements. Thomas was essentially strip mining the company's value, extracting short-term profits while destroying the culture and relationships that had made Morrison Industries successful in the first place. Daniel tried confronting Thomas about these changes during board meetings, but the CEO had done his homework well. Every decision was supported by consulting reports, financial analysis, and market research that made Daniel's objections seem like sentimental nostalgia from an old man who could not accept that business had evolved beyond his understanding. "Daniel, I respect everything you've built here," Thomas would say with practiced sympathy, "but the market has changed, and we need to adapt or die. Your wife, Craig, God rest her soul, would want this company to survive and not become a museum piece that goes bankrupt, trying to maintain outdated employment practices." The invocation of Karen's name to justify destroying her legacy was particularly cruel, but Thomas knew exactly what he was doing. He was systematically undermining Daniel's gettability and authority while positioning himself as the savior, who would modernize an aging company before it collapsed under the weight of its founder sentimentality. What really opened Daniel's eyes was a conversation he accidentally overheard between Thomas and his wife Christina at a company charity event in Dallas. Daniel had stepped outside for some air, standing near an open window where he could hear but not be seen, when he caught Thomas bragging about his plans for Morrison Industries. "Give me 2 more years, baby," Thomas told Christina, "and I'll have this company so profitable that we can sell it to one of the big conglomerates for 3 or 4 billion. Old man Morrison still owns it, but he's so checked out and depressed he doesn't even read the financial reports anymore. By the time he figures out what's happening, LL have $1 million payout, and he'll be stuck with a company that has been gutted for quick profits." Christina's response was even more revealing. "Just make sure you fire all those old loyal workers before the sale goes through. The acquiring company won't want to inherit expensive veteran employees when they can hire cheaper people. Plus, that'll be fun watching those smug longtime workers realize they were worthless once Daniel's not around to protect them anymore." That conversation changed everything for Daniel Morrison. He realized that his grief had blinded him to what was really happening to the company he and Karen had spent 3 decades building. Thomas wasn't just a modern CEO making difficult but necessary decisions. He was a predator systematically destroying Daniel's life's work while planning to profit from the wreckage. But Daniel also understood that he couldn't just fire Thomas and take back control. The CEO had spent months carefully positioning himself with the board, creating paper trails that justified every destructive decision, and building relationships with key employees who now depended on Thomas for their positions. A direct confrontation would lead to a messy corporate battle that could tear the company apart. That's when Daniel came up with one of the most brilliant undercover operations in corporate history. Instead of fighting Thomas openly, he would disappear from public view while secretly working inside the company as an ordinary employee. gathering evidence of fraud and corruption that would destroy Thomas's credibility while exposing exactly how the CEO was betraying Morrison Industries. Let me pause here for just a moment to catch my breath, because thinking about Daniel's strategy still amazes me. At my age, having seen so many corporate battles over the years, I gotta say this man's approach was genius. Instead of relying on lawyers and board votes, he was gonna beat Thomas by showing everyone exactly what kind of person the CEO really was when he thought nobody important was watching. Daniel's plan required completely disappearing from his previous life and creating a new identity that would let him work inside Morrison Industries without being recognized. The company had over 12,000 employees spread across multiple facilities, and most workers had never met the reclusive founder who preferred staying at his ranch to attending corporate events. He started by letting it be known through the grapevine that his grief over Karen's death had become overwhelming, and he was taking an extended leave to deal with his mental health. The board and Thomas were only too happy to accommodate this absence, seeing it as an opportunity to solidify control without the founder's inconvenient questions. Then Daniel created his new identity, James Wilson, a 67-year-old former construction worker whose company had gone bankrupt, leaving him with no pension and no choice but to take whatever work he could find. The background was perfect because it was mostly true. Daniel had been a construction worker before starting his own business, and he knew the work and the culture intimately. Getting hired as a janitor at Morrison Industries required suppressing everything that made Daniel Morrison recognizable. He let his hair grow longer and grayer, grew a beard, started wearing reading glasses he didn't need, and adopted this slightly stooped posture of someone whose back had been broken by decades of physical labor. The transformation was remarkable. He looked like every invisible older worker that wealthy people never really see. The janitorial contractor that handled cleaning services for Morrison Industries hired James Wilson without extensive background checks, assuming that a man in his late 60s applying for minimum wage work was exactly what he appeared to be, someone desperate enough to take any job available. They assigned him to the night shift at company headquarters, which was perfect for Daniel's investigative purposes. My first encounter with James Wilson came during his second week on the night cleaning crew. I was working my usual security rounds at Morrison Industries headquarters when I noticed something odd about the new janitor was mopping floors in the executive suite. He moved through those offices with the careful attention of someone who understood exactly what he was looking at. Financial reports, contract documents, strategic planning materials. Most janitors, no offense to the profession, don't spend extra time reading corporate paperwork while they're supposed to be emptying trash cans. But this guy was methodically photographing documents with a smartphone that looked way too expensive for someone making $12 an hour to own. My security training made me suspicious, so I started paying closer attention to James Wilson's activities. Over several weeks, I observed patterns that didn't make sense for an ordinary janitor. He asked questions about company operations that showed deep understanding of business strategy. He knew which executives were trustworthy and which ones were part of Thomas's inner circle. Most tellingly, he seemed to have access to secure areas that required employee badges he shouldn't have possessed. That's when I decided to confront this mysterious janitor directly and find out what his real agenda was. I waited until we were alone in the executive suite at 2 a.m., then approached him while he was photographing financial documents in Thomas Blackwell's office. "Mr. Morrison," I said quietly, using his real name and watching his reaction carefully. "You're either the world's most dedicated janitor or you're conducting an undercover investigation that could blow up this entire company." Daniel froze mid-photograph, then slowly turned to look at me with an expression that mixed surprise with careful evaluation. "How long have you known?" he asked, dropping the janitor persona entirely. "About 3 weeks," I replied. "Your cleaning technique is too systematic. You know too much about corporate operations, and you're way too interested in Thomas Blackwell's financial records. Plus, I've been working security here long enough to recognize the founder's walk, even when he's trying to look like someone else." Daniel studied me for a long moment, probably calculating whether I was a threat to his investigation or a potential ally. Sam, isn't it? Uncle Sam. The guys call you. Karen mentioned you a few times. Said, you were one of the few honest people in this building who actually cared about doing the right thing. That reference to Karen sealed our partnership right there. Daniel explained his undercover mission to expose Thomas's systematic looting of Morrison Industries, and I agreed to help him document the fraud while maintaining his cover as an ordinary janitor. We became unlikely partners in corporate espionage, a billionaire owner, and a security guard working together to save a company from its own CEO. Over the next 4 months, Daniel's investigation uncovered a level of corruption that exceeded even his worst suspicions. Thomas wasn't just cutting costs and reducing benefits. He was actively stealing from the company through a complex scheme involving shell corporations, inflated vendor contracts, and kickback arrangements that funneled millions into his personal accounts. The fraud was sophisticated and well hidden, requiring detailed analysis of thousands of financial transactions to identify the patterns. Thomas would approve contracts with vendors who charged Morrison Industries premium prices, then receive consulting fees from those same vendors that were really kickbacks for the overpriced deals. He'd also created fake expense reports for business travel that never happened, charging the company for luxury vacations he took with Christina. But the worst part of Thomas's betrayal was how he treated longtime Morrison Industries employees who'd given decades of loyal service to the company. Daniel watched from his janitor position as Thomas systematically fired veteran workers who were close to retirement, replacing them with cheaper contractors who had no benefits or job security. The fired employees lost not just their incomes, but also the pensions they'd been promised after years of dedication. One particularly heartbreaking case involved Robert Chan, a 62-year-old warehouse manager who'd worked at Morrison Industries for 28 years. Robert had started as a forklift operator back when the company was still small, and he'd grown with the organization, eventually managing the entire logistics operation for the Dallas facility. Thomas fired Robert 3 years before his planned retirement, claiming that the position was being restructured and that Robert's skills were no longer aligned with the company's evolving needs. The real reason was that Robert's pension would have cost the company about $850,000 over his retirement years, and eliminating him before that obligation kicked in would make Morrison Industries' financial statements look better for a potential sale. Daniel watched Robert clean out his desk with tears streaming down his face, saying goodbye to colleagues who'd become family over nearly 3 decades. The older man's entire retirement plan had been built around that Morrison Industries pension, and losing it meant he'd probably have to work minimum wage jobs until his health failed. That incident crystallized for Daniel exactly what was at stake in his investigation. This wasn't just about corporate fraud or financial manipulation. It was about real people's lives being destroyed by executives who viewed loyal employees as nothing more than expenses to be eliminated in pursuit of short-term profits. The evidence Daniel gathered over 6 months was comprehensive and devastating. He documented 27 separate instances of Thomas steering contracts to vendors who paid kickbacks, totaling over $8.3 million in stolen company funds. He found proof of fraudulent expense reports exceeding $400,000. Most damning, he discovered emails where Thomas explicitly discussed his plan to strip and flip Morrison Industries by gutting the company's employee benefits and operational excellence before selling it to unsuspecting buyers. But Daniel's investigation also revealed another layer of corruption that made the whole situation even more despicable. Christina Blackwell wasn't just Thomas's wife. She was an active participant in the fraud scheme, using her position as the CEO's spouse to intimidate employees and punish anyone who questioned her husband's decisions. Christina had no official role at Morrison Industries, but she treated the company headquarters like her personal kingdom. She'd show up drunk to board meetings, hurling insults at employees who weren't subservient enough. She'd demand that workers drop everything to run personal errands for her. She'd make racist and classist comments about the janitorial staff and warehouse workers, treating them like they were subhuman. The confrontation that would expose everything began on a Tuesday morning when Christina decided to visit the headquarters to humiliate some employees who had been disrespectful to her at a company event. She'd specifically targeted the cleaning crew, deciding that the janitors needed to be reminded of their place in the corporate hierarchy. Daniel was mopping floors in the executive conference room when Christina arrived with two of her wealthy friends, all of them carrying designer shopping bags and champagne from what was clearly a morning drinking session. The three women were loud, entitled, and looking for someone to torment for their amusement. "Oh my God, look at this pathetic old janitor," Christina announced to her friends, pointing at Daniel with her champagne glass. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. My husband's company is filled with useless old people who should have been fired years ago. I keep telling Thomas to clean out all this dead weight, but he's too soft-hearted sometimes." Daniel continued mopping, keeping his head down and playing his janitor role perfectly. He'd spent months cultivating the image of a humble, somewhat slow older worker who posed no threat to anyone. Christina's friends laughed at her cruel observation, emboldened by alcohol and the belief that their social status gave them permission to humiliate working-class people. "Excuse me, janitor," Christina called out in a mocking tone. "Stop what you're doing and come here. I need you to understand something about your place in this company." Daniel slowly approached, still carrying his mop and maintaining the stooped posture he'd adopted as part of his disguise. Christina looked him up and down with obvious disgust, taking in his worn work clothes and weathered appearance. "How much does my husband pay you to push that mop around?" Christina demanded. "Actually, don't answer. I don't really care. What I want you to understand is that people like you only have jobs here because people like me allow it. You're completely replaceable, totally worthless, and honestly, kind of disgusting to look at." Her friends giggled at this cruelty, clearly entertained by watching someone with power abuse someone without it. Daniel kept his expression neutral, giving no sign that Christina's words affected him in any way. He dealt with entitled bullies his entire career, and he understood that responding emotionally would only encourage more abuse. "You know what really bothers me about old workers like you?" Christina continued, warming to her topic. "You think because you've been here a long time, that gives you some kind of value or importance. But the reality is that you're just taking up space that could be filled by younger, smarter, more attractive people. My husband's been too nice about letting you ancient relics hang around, but that's going to change real soon." One of Christina's friends chimed in. "Girl, you should fire him right now, just to prove you can." That would be so iconic. Christina's eyes lit up at that suggestion. "Oh my God, you're right. That would be hilarious. Okay, old man, you're fired. Pack up your mop bucket and get out of this building. You're done working here." Daniel finally spoke, keeping his voice humble and concerned. "Ma'am, I don't think you have the authority to fire employees. I work for the janitorial contractor, not directly for Morrison Industries." Christina's face flushed with anger at being contradicted, even politely. "Did this old idiot just talk back to me?" "Oh, hell no. That's it. I'm calling my husband right now and making sure you lose not just this job, but any job you might ever try to get in this city." Nobody disrespects Christina Blackwell and gets away with it. She pulled out her phone and called Thomas, putting the conversation on speaker so her friends could hear. "Baby, I need you to come to the executive conference room right now. There's a janitor here who needs to be taught a lesson about respect. And I want you to handle it in front of everyone so the rest of these worthless workers understand who's really in charge." Thomas arrived 15 minutes later, looking annoyed at being interrupted but willing to support whatever power play Christina was orchestrating. He'd learned early in their marriage that the easiest way to keep her happy was to let her exercise authority over people she considered beneath them. "What's the problem, honey?" Thomas asked, barely glancing at Daniel. "This old janitor was being disrespectful to me and my friends," Christina lied smoothly. "I want you to fire him immediately. And I want it done in a way that makes an example of what happens when people forget their place around here." Thomas looked at Daniel for the first time, sizing him up as nothing more than an obstacle to his wife's satisfaction. "What's your name, old man?" James Wilson, sir, Daniel replied, maintaining his cover identity. Well, James, my wife says you're disrespectful to her, which means you're finished working at Morrison Industries. I'll be contacting your employer to make sure you're terminated immediately. And I'll also make sure they understand that you're not suitable for employment at any of our partner facilities. Christina wasn't satisfied with simple termination. She wanted humiliation, the kind of public degradation that would make her feel powerful, and that's not enough, baby. I want him to understand exactly what he is, a worthless old man who's taking up valuable space in our company. Make him apologize for his pathetic existence. That demand pushed Thomas into territory where even he felt uncomfortable. The CEO was corrupt and greedy, but he wasn't naturally cruel in the performative way Christina enjoyed. Still, he'd learned that refusing Christina's requests led to dramatic scenes that weren't worth the trouble. You heard her, Thomas told Daniel with obvious reluctance. Apologize to my wife for wasting her time with your presence. Daniel looked at Christina, then at Thomas, then at the security cameras he knew were recording everything that was happening in that conference room. He'd spent 6 months gathering evidence of fraud and corruption. But this moment was going to provide something even more valuable, proof of the casual cruelty and contempt that Thomas and Christina felt toward ordinary workers. I'm sorry, ma'am, Daniel said quietly, playing his janitor role to perfection. I didn't mean to upset you or waste your time. But Christina wasn't done. She'd found a victim who wouldn't fight back, and she wanted to extract every drop of satisfaction from the humiliation. That's not good enough. I want you to get on your knees and apologize properly, like the servant you are. This demand shocked even Thomas, who tried to intervene. Christina, that's unnecessary. The man already apologized. Don't you dare defend him. Christina screamed at her husband. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're too soft with these people. They need to understand that they mean nothing, that they're completely disposable, and that we're the only reason they have any kind of life at all. The conference room had filled with employees who'd been drawn by the commotion, creating an audience for Christina's cruelty. Some looked uncomfortable with what they were witnessing, but most were too afraid of repercussions to speak up. This was the culture Thomas had created at Morrison Industries, one where power and fear replaced respect and fairness. Daniel slowly knelt down on the conference room floor, his weathered knees protesting the movement. Christina looked triumphant. Her friends were recording the whole thing on their phones, and Thomas looked like he wished he was anywhere else but couldn't figure out how to escape. There, that's better, Christina announced to her watching audience. Everyone take a good look at this pathetic old man. This is what happens when you forget who's in charge around here. My husband and I are the only reason any of you have jobs. And if you don't like how we run things, you can join this loser on the unemployment line. That's when I decided I'd seen enough of this circus and stepped forward to end it. I'd been standing in the doorway, documenting everything. But Christina's cruelty had crossed a line that made intervention necessary. Mrs. Blackwell, I said loudly enough to cut through her triumphant ranting. I think you should probably stop talking right now. You're digging yourself, oh, that's going to be real hard to climb out of. Christina whirled around to face me, fury radiating from every pore. And who the hell are you to tell me what to do? You're just another nobody security guard who should remember his place before he joins this old fool on the street. I'm Sam Rodriguez, I replied calmly, and I've been head of security at Morrison Industries for 18 years. And I'm telling you that if you don't shut your mouth and apologize to Mr. Morrison right now, you're about to experience the worst day of your entire privileged life. The name Mr. Morrison hit the room like a bomb. Christina froze, her expression shifting from rage to confusion. Thomas went pale, clearly trying to process what I just said. The gathered employees started murmuring, looking at the kneeling janitor with new recognition. What did you just call him? Christina tasked, her voice uncertain for the first time since she'd started her abuse. I called him Mr. Morrison. I repeated clearly, as in Daniel Morrison, founder and sole owner of Morrison Industries. The man who's been working here undercover for 6 months. while documenting your husband's systematic theft of company funds and your own campaign of harassment against employees. Daniel slowly stood up from his kneeling position, pulling off the reading glasses and brushing off his janitor uniform. Even with the disguise, once you knew who you were looking at, the resemblance to the man whose portrait hung in the lobby became obvious. "Hello, Thomas," Daniel said, his voice carrying authority that cut through the shocked silence. "We need to talk about what you've been doing to my company. And, Christina, you need to start thinking about how you're going to explain to a jury why you thought it was appropriate to humiliate an employee who was doing his job." Christina looked like she might faint or vomit, maybe both. The blood had drained from her face entirely, leaving her makeup standing out like war paint on a ghost. Thomas was frantically calculating his legal exposure, probably already planning his defense strategy for the fraud charges he knew were coming. "This is entrapment," Thomas finally blurted out, grasping at any possible escape. "You can't just disguise yourself and spy on your own employees. Nothing you've gathered will be admissible in court." Daniel smiled, the kind of smile that meant someone was about to get destroyed by superior preparation. "Actually, Thomas, as the sole owner of this company, I have every legal right to observe operations in any capacity I choose. And since I wasn't conducting a criminal investigation, but rather exercising my ownership oversight, entrapment doesn't apply. But thanks for reminding me about the legal proceedings. I've already forwarded all my evidence to the FBI, the SEC, and the Texas Attorney General's office." The gathered employees gasped at that revelation. Thomas's corruption hadn't just been corporate fraud. It had crossed into federal crimes that carried serious prison time. Christina started backing toward the door, probably calculating whether she could claim ignorance about her husband's criminal activities. "And Christina," Daniel continued, his voice hardening, "you need to stay right where you are, because I've got video evidence of you committing assault, harassment, and creating a hostile work environment. The civil lawsuit you're about to face will be bad enough. But I'm also pressing criminal charges for elder abuse based on your treatment of me and other older workers." "I didn't know it was you," Christina protested desperately. "If I'd known you were the owner, I never would have said those things." Daniel's response was devastating in its simplicity. "Exactly. You only treated me that way because you thought I was powerless and couldn't fight back. That tells everyone here exactly what kind of person you really are." The next several hours were a whirlwind of legal activity, board meetings, terminations, and criminal charges. Federal agents arrived to execute search warrants on Thomas's office and seize financial records. The board of directors held an emergency meeting where Daniel resumed his position as CEO and terminated Thomas with cause, voiding his employment contract and any severance or golden parachute provisions. The evidence Daniel had gathered over 6 months was comprehensive and devastating. Forensic accountants confirmed that Thomas had stolen over $8.7 million through the kickback schemes. The fraudulent expense reports added another $400,000. Most significantly, Daniel's documentation proved that Thomas had deliberately destroyed the company's culture and employee welfare, while planning to sell Morrison Industries in a condition that would have made it worthless to any legitimate buyer. Christina's legal problems were almost as severe as her husband's. Daniel filed criminal charges for elder abuse, assault, harassment, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The video evidence of her forcing an elderly worker to kneel and apologize was particularly damning, creating sympathy for Daniel and outrage toward Christina among the jury pool. The civil lawsuit Daniel filed against both Blackwolves was even more devastating, seeking $450 million in damages for corporate fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The enormous sum was designed to strip them of everything they'd accumulated through their years of corruption and cruelty. The media coverage was extensive and brutal. Local and national news outlets picked up the story of the billionaire owner who'd worked undercover as a janitor to expose corporate fraud, and the entitled trophy wife who'd humiliated him while unwittingly digging her own grave. The video of Christina forcing Daniel to kneel went viral, generating millions of views and universal condemnation. Thomas ended up pleading guilty to federal fraud charges and received a 12-year prison sentence. Christina was convicted of elder abuse and sentenced to 3 years, with an additional 5 years probation. The civil judgment against them exceeded $280 million, ensuring they'd spend the rest of their lives in financial ruin even after completing their prison terms. But the most satisfying outcome was what Daniel did with Morrison Industries after reclaiming control. He immediately reversed all of Thomas's destructive policies, reinstating benefits, raising wages, and rehiring veteran workers who'd been fired unjustly. Robert Chen, the warehouse manager who'd been terminated 3 years before retirement, was rehired with full back pay and a pension that exceeded his original plan. Daniel also established the Curran Morrison Foundation in his late wife's honor, providing scholarships for children of Morrison Industries employees and supporting workers who faced financial hardships. The foundation's mission statement emphasized dignity, respect, and the value of treating all people as human beings regardless of their position or parent power. The company's culture transformed almost overnight once word spread about. Daniel's undercover investigation and Thomas's termination. Employees who'd been living in fear suddenly felt safe, speaking up about problems and suggesting improvements. Morale improved dramatically, and productivity increased as workers realized they were valued rather than viewed as disposable expenses. Years later, Morrison Industries became a case study in business schools about ethical leadership, corporate culture, and the importance of treating employees with dignity. Daniel's undercover operation was analyzed as an unorthodox, but effective approach to identifying and eliminating corruption before it destroyed an organization. Daniel himself returned to active management of Morrison Industries, but with a new approach shaped by his 6 months working as an ordinary employee. He implemented policies requiring all executives to spend time working regular jobs within the company, ensuring that leadership understood the reality of frontline workers' experiences. Christina Blackwell's fall from Dallas society was complete and permanent. Her wealthy friends abandoned her immediately, not wanting to be associated with her crimes and cruelty. After serving her prison sentence, she reportedly moved to another state under her maiden name, working retail jobs and living in the kind of poverty she'd once looked down upon with such contempt. As I reflect on this case years later, I'm struck by how Daniel's patience and strategy exposed not just criminal fraud, but something deeper and more insidious. The casual cruelty that wealthy people often inflict on those they view as beneath them. Christina's abuse of Daniel wasn't driven by any genuine grievance. It was purely about exercising power over someone she believed couldn't fight back. The investigation reminded me that real character is revealed by how people treat those who can't benefit them or retaliate against them. Christina showed her true nature when she thought she was humiliating a powerless janitor, and that revelation destroyed her more completely than any fraud charges could have. So what do you think about rich people who treat workers badly just because they can? Have you ever witnessed someone with power abusing employees or service workers, or been on the receiving end of that kind of treatment yourself? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, Tell me what city you're rewatching from and share any experiences. You've had with bosses or wealthy people who thought their money gave them permission to treat others like garbage. But before you go, I need to tell you Uncle Sam's next investigation, because it involves something that will restore your faith in karma and humble. Rich people who think service workers are beneath them. Picture this. A wealthy woman who regularly abused and humiliated waitresses at her favorite restaurant, not knowing that the quiet server she tortured daily actually owned the entire restaurant chain and was about to teach her the most expensive lesson about respect she'd ever receive, right? Make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell, because Uncle Sam's next story exposes I saw a rich woman abuse waitress. The waitress owned the restaurant chain. The lesson from Daniel Morrison and Christina Blackwell's story remains clear. Treating people with cruelty when you think they'd powerless says everything about your character, nothing about their worth. Because sometimes the janitor you're humiliating is actually a billionaire who's documenting every word you say. And Sometimes karma arrives disguised as a mop bucket and a hidden camera bro. And sometimes it takes an old security guard with 40 years of experience. Watching human nature to recognize that the most powerful person in the room is often the one everyone is ignoring.